So for starting off tonight we got Bradley. Is that how
Carestia.
you put? Bradley has been a software developer and an architect for around 30 years now, working with .NET and Angular frameworks. He loves to play pretty much any kind of game. I'm assuming video games or table games.
Both.
Both. Okay, that's good. He loved Star Wars and he loved hanging out with his wife and dogs in Central Oregon. So welcome, Bradley.
Thanks. Okay. Today, I'm going to talk about Angular component architecture, and more specifically, where different kinds of code should go in an Angular application. To start with, I'm going to go over how a typical Angular application is organized and compare it to the model view model pattern that Angular was originally based on. Then I'll look at how the introduction of signal-based features has impacted the testability of such applications. Next, I'll describe an architecture that increases the testability of your applications while still taking advantage of these new features. And finally, I'll show an example application that implements that architecture. So let's start with the building blocks of an Angular application. Of course, you've got your components with its HTML and TypeScript file. There's also directives, services, pipes, even stores. There are a couple others that I could have included on this slide, but these are the main building blocks that would appear in any Angular application. As for what currently goes into them, of course, your view markup goes into the HTML file. The TypeScript has quite a bit going on with access to the DOM, inputs from other components, commands coming from user interaction, usually a little bit of state, and even business logic tends to be present in most Angular components today. Directives tend to be a bit more focused, accessing the DOM and manipulating its elements. Services have business logic as well as a data access layer to get to APIs. Pipes have their own business logic for transforming data from one shape to another. And stores have most of the state of the application and also contain a decent amount of business logic in most applications for things like error handling or translating a form value into something that an API can consume. Let's see how this compares to the model view model pattern, which is the foundational architectural pattern of the Angular framework ever since AngularJS. This pattern is composed of three layers. It has the view, which is entirely concerned with what's presented to the user on the screen. In web development terminology, we would say this is all concerned with the DOM. The view model, which contains the state for the view, as well as handling user interaction and any logic that is entirely view specific. And then the model, which contains all the business logic, as well as the data access layer. As a comparison point, I'm going to use the Windows Presentation Foundation, which is also based on MVVM. In a WPF application, the view has a XAML file, which is a markup file very similar to our HTML files, at least in terms of purpose, and the C# file that goes behind it that contains any direct view interaction, as well as inputs from other controls. In Angular applications, the view is composed of the component file with its HTML and TypeScript, as well as any directives. In WPF, a view model has a state class called a view model. It has converters for transforming data and commands for handling user interaction. All three of those concerns are typically present in Angular components, but the view model layer for an Angular application also contains pipes with specific transformation logic, as well as stores from the rest of the view state. And last, the model for a WPF app is contained entirely of services, whether those are for business logic or for accessing the data layer like a database or even other APIs. And Angular apps have the component again, that business logic that tends to creep in. Of course, services for both logic and accessing APIs in the web app, and stores for the business logic that ends up in them. Now, before I go any further, I want to be clear about some assumptions that I'm going to make in this talk. The first one being that all business logic should be unit tested, and the second one being that testbed is not a unit testing framework, but rather a component or integration testing framework. I don't have time today to go into exactly why that is, but if you want to learn more about that, I did a talk for the Angular Community Meetup a couple years ago. It's on the ng-conf YouTube channel at that link, or you can scan that QR code. Maybe at the end we can get it in the chat. So with that in mind, going back to the building blocks, to test this application, we need to put component tests onto the component HTML and TypeScript, or them as one unit really, and then directives, because those all talk to the view and interact with the DOM. Using testbed and a component test is the only way to create a DOM for those tests. And then everything with business logic needs a unit test. And that means that components end up with both kinds of tests. We've been able to get away with this sort of architecture because Angular has been very flexible on how view-dependent classes are created, with anything that relies on the framework happening during the component lifecycle rather than class construction. However, that's starting to change with the advent of signals and signal-based features. That's because these new features, in particular the decorator replacement signals, depend directly on the Angular dependency injection container being available when they are constructed. Or, to use the Angular terminology, it requires an injection context. The decorator replacement signals also can only be created as field initializers. That means you can't put a facade service in between in order to abstract that dependency on the injection container. The indirect signal store has followed this pattern in requiring an injection context to be created, and on top of that, it doesn't support or any kind of constructor injection. Rather, any external dependencies to the store have to directly inject from that Angular dependency injection container as well. In terms of testing, what this means is that the vast majority of signal-based features require component tests or integration tests in order to be tested. If you want to do pure isolated unit tests, the only things you can have in the and computed signals. Another way, this means that signal-based components and stores are fundamentally incompatible with isolated unit tests. Thankfully, with a few minor adjustments to the architecture of an Angular application, these restrictions can be bypassed in such a way that all the important logic remains highly testable. I'm calling this solution a signal-friendly architecture. It's based on two facts. The first one being that you only need to unit test classes that contain non-trivial logic. And the second fact, the one that I just established, that signal-based components and stores cannot be unit tested. Put those two things together, and I've come to the conclusion that the best approach is to simply avoid putting logic in components and stores, and then don't unit test them, since there's nothing interesting to test anymore. This can be done by following a few simple rules. The first one being to move all that logic out of components and into services and pipes, since those are still easily unit tested. Then signals, or at least these signal-based features, but really all signals, only exist in components, stores, and directives, because those are the things that are going to be component tested anyway. Because we have this really nice delineation of where signals start and end, services can now easily be pure methods. They just take a value in, didn't matter that it came from a signal, and return some other value. If they need to perform side effects, of course they can, but to keep unit testing up and a clear flow of logic, pure methods, as much as possible, is the way to go. Then only unit test those services and pipes, since that's where all the logic is. Now, when we do this, going back to the building block diagram, it takes all the state and business logic out of the component, which means it no longer needs to be unit tested. It also takes the business logic out of the store, which means it doesn't need to be tested at all, at least not in a focused fashion. That may be a little strange at first, but when a store is in this state, the only thing that it's doing is calling framework and external service methods in order to fetch and update that state. And it's not like there's no tests at all on the store. The store will easily be covered by application-wide integration tests. Going to the MVVM diagram, that takes components out of the view model and model because it doesn't have any of that logic anymore. And it takes stores out of the model for the same reason. Now you'll notice that every file in the Angular application has exactly one layer that it belongs to. This is a clear promotion of both separation of concerns and the single responsibility principle. It means that we know exactly where to put any kind of logic in an app and how to test it. It's really how we should have been building Angular applications in the first place. So, at the end of the day, what I want you to understand from this talk is following MVVM is a great way to enforce separation of concerns throughout an Angular application. It also means that components generally shouldn't have logic. If you do put logic in those components, the new signal-based features that are coming out make unit testing problematic, if not impossible. So, take that logic out, don't unit test those components, and still be able to take advantage of the new signal-based features. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and get into the reference implementation. This is a public repository on GitHub. The link is on the screen, and again, a QR code if you want to scan it with your phone, and I'll try to get the link to that in the chat after I'm done as well. So I'm going to switch over to Chrome. All right, this is the application running. It's a simple find your favorite dog breed quiz. So it's going to take some user input, do a little bit of logic, and do some API calls to get the final output. So I'm going to go ahead and say I'd much rather take a nap than run a marathon. I would prefer cookies, at least today. It takes me a lot less than 15 minutes to get ready, and I'm pretty flexible. So my perfect breed is a dachshund, and we got a nice, cute picture of a dachshund there. All right, so now if we go to the code for this, starting with the main component of the application, which is the quiz component, it's primarily concerned with setting up dependency injection. It provides the main store for the app, as well as the factory for setting up the quiz, and the individual question factories that guy consumes. The template's pretty simple. It's got a if statement that checks if there's any questions left, reading a signal from the store, and if there are, then it reads the first signal, or the first question from that array, rather, and displays it in the question component. Otherwise, it displays the winning breed in the result component. This could have a component test, but a really simple if-else like this, I'd be on the edge personally in terms of actually making one. But the important thing to notice is that there is absolutely no logic in the component class itself. It only has this inject statement. So we don't need to unit test it. Going into the store, there's a bit more code, but still no real logic. Everything in here is just calling external APIs or framework methods. We can start with the with state, which just sets up the initial state of the store. Then this load breeds method calls an external API before using its result to update that piece of the state. The get questions method does the same thing, but with an internal service. It doesn't need to do an API call. I'll get to handle answer in a second, but you'll notice there's also no logic here, just again, updating from a service call. The only piece of logic you could argue at all is in this class is this init function that calls that load breeds and get questions method. At the end of the day, though, if I was going to write a unit test for this class, I wouldn't consider that a particularly interesting test. All I'm checking is that service and framework methods were called. On top of that, this is going to be easily covered in any integration test, since this store has to fully initialize in order for the application to work at all. So again, no tests on the store class. Going to the question component now. Oh, actually, let me go to the Dog data service. That's just a little wrapper around the HTTP client. You could argue that this doesn't really need a test, but I did one for completeness sake that verifies that it calls the HTTP client with a get and uses the resulting value for its return. All right, going on to the question component. It's got a little bit of styling and then a template with a card component. It reads a input signal for its title, and then that same signal to get the answers in a for loop. It has a button for every possible answer, and the click handler for that is going to directly call the store, that handle answer method, with the question that was used as well as the answer that was selected. Now, this could be a single line function in the component class itself, but again, not a very interesting thing to test. And the class itself otherwise has no logic whatsoever. It's just this input signal and injecting the store so it can call that method in the click handler. So now we can go over to that method, which is the handle answer function here. And so it's just another patch state call using an external service as an updater. And so we'll look at that. So this service just takes the question, it removes it from the deck, and it runs the answers filter logic on the list of all breeds to narrow down the list for the next question. This is really easy to test because it's a pure method. It just takes the state, returns a new state. So I've got my test here where it verifies that the question was removed and that the breeds were filtered down correctly. I realized that I forgot to show you the factory service, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. The factory service is a constructor injected service, which is not something you can do in a signal store, so very good reason to externalize this logic. But otherwise, it's logic that oftentimes would appear in the store itself. But keeping it out means that we can unit test it, which is really important. So this just takes all the factories and creates each of the questions, and then shuffles them so that it's never in the same order twice. And that's all the test verifies here, that all the questions were used and that doing it twice doesn't return the questions in the same order. So now that we have answered all the questions, we can display the final result. That final result has another card component. It reads a input signal for the name, and then it extracts logic from the component in a slightly different way, this time using a custom pipe instead of a service, at least not directly, to both get the logic out, which would typically involve subscribing to some sort of observable, then usually setting component state with the result. It also means that we don't have to bind to a method. So that pipe looks like, sorry, it's up here. This. All it does is delegate the value into a API call that exists in a separate service, just for good separation of concerns, then returns the observable of the base64 string back so that the async pipe can consume that. The unit tests for this are just verifying that that's what happens, that it calls the API service with the correct data, and that it, in fact, returned that observable. That service is another thin wrapper around HTTP client. It's got a little bit of logic to set the correct URL because there's some interesting aspects to how the URLs are constructed for these images, which then is verified in the unit test, because again, this is a service, easy to unit test, where I can check that both a regular breed and a breed that has a parent super breed both work correctly. So that's the application. I hope that this talk can help you make better, more testable Angular applications in the future. It's a really good architecture. We should have been doing it in the first place, and now it's just super important for making our applications testable. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you very much.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Bradley. Great presentation. So we have a couple of questions here in the Q&A section. So the first one is from Matthew. Do you separate out your unit test from your full testbed test? If so, how? Using a separate file, separate describe?
So if you follow this architecture, you shouldn't need to really mix those two things together. But if I had to, they tend to separate themselves out because the unit tests end up in spec files. And typically, if I'm going to do a component test, I'm going to use a framework like Cypress component tests, and those have a different extension like .sci.ts files. So they kind of separate themselves out in that respect. If you're going to do a single spec file with both kinds, I would absolutely put them in different describes, but I would try to get away from that problem in the first place.
Right. And we have another question. How do you determine if the code is complete enough to move it out of the component and into a service? What is your criteria, like
So
based on your experience?
ultimately, it's the eye test, right? Does it look like it's something that I would want to write a test for? But is one really easy criteria you can use that'll catch the majority of cases, and that is code complexity. There's an ESLint rule you can turn on for code complexity. You can set it to a max of 1 for components and store files, and that will catch anything that's got any sort of if statement. I think it catches for loops too, and it'll just make sure that there's no branches, no complex anything going on that would definitely want to be tested. It's not a perfect analogy for non-trivial logic, but it's close enough that that's what I'm using as an automated way to catch it.
Yeah, and that's a good one. I didn't know that existed, so I'm gonna apply it to my code. And we got one last question for now. If you no longer test components, are you just adjusting how coverage is calculated?
A great code coverage debate. So, I am a big fan of code coverage as a tool. It's a great way to determine if you're actually covering all branches. And because we don't have any branching logic, I'm not so worried about that anymore. I don't think code coverage as a metric is a great thing because it tends to encourage bad behavior, writing tests just to satisfy that tool, as opposed to writing tests that are actually significant in the logic that they cover. So, my perspective on this is I'm just not going to worry about code coverage, in particular for components and stores, because there's no logic that I'm trying to test that I need to be checking the coverage of. If you still want to use that metric on services and pipes, that's fine. I personally don't like it as a metric. I would only use it as a helpful tool for me as a developer.
All right, that's good. Yeah, for our next speaker, I will pass it on to Chris, so he can introduce our next speaker.
Right. Tonight we have Kate Gabel. Welcome again. I'm really glad to have you back. So Kate comes to us. She's an Angular developer with full stack experience and also an ng-conf speaker.
Thank you for joining me for this talk. I'm not going to see your responses, but what I would like everyone to do is to go to the chat and put a plus if you are using NX in your either current project that you're working on, that you're getting paid for, or you've used NX before. Because this is going to be my matrix to if this talk is even worth my time or your time, because the reason I wanted to present to you about NX today is just to let people know that there is another way of working on your repository using NX monorepo, and you can even use it for very small Angular projects. When you use monorepo with NX, it will provide you with solid foundation, room for growth, and I'm going to give a real small analogy about growing family and how you would find an ideal home for that, just to kind of draw a picture of what I'm talking about. And we'll begin by understanding the basics of NX monorepo and how easy it is to get started. Hopefully I will be able to illustrate that using NX for monorepo gives you flexibility, scalability, and organizational benefits. And Chris already introduced me. Thank you for that. Here's some links that I have if you follow me on X, or you can check out my blog. I haven't really blogged for a while, but it is there. The theme of this presentation is from Hero Devs, where I work as a consultant. And GitHub will have the example that I will provide in this talk. So again, main goal of this talk is just to see if I can convince you to go with monorepo using NX, even for very smallest Angular projects. And if we go through through a process of writing a software and what it entitles. Our main objective is to increase our productivity because we all know how to write code. And NX actually gives you lots of tools to increase the productivity. So if you're on a team of 10, 100, or just a team of 1, there are many benefits of going with NX monorepo. Also, because we want to deliver our products that we write software for on time, NX also gives you some tools to fast forward your continuous delivery and integration processes. And I also wanted to just give everybody an idea that NX exists, just in case you haven't heard of it. And I'm sure most Angular developers have, but for those who are just starting with Angular, this is another tool in your toolbox to just be more productive and deliver most value from your time. And the last bullet point here of and how to handle no for an answer, and we'll go through that because if you, like me, will do a presentation on integrating NX monorepo within the project that you're working on, you might stumble upon people saying no to you, and we'll go through that as well. So what is NX? So NX is open source build system that provides tools and techniques to improve developer productivity, and it gives developers tools to run developer tasks like test, lint, and build just faster. So all of the same things you're doing right now, but they could just be done faster, okay? So here's my analogy. Let's imagine you're planning to buy a new home and you're starting up with a new family. There's a couple of things that you want to keep in mind. There's definitely a price point. And for that price and the budget that you have in mind, you get certain things. You have to pick within a certain location that has certain schools if you're planning to have children. You want to think about the space that you're going to get for your money. And also, is there a way to comfortably grow within that space that you're buying? So just like purchasing a home, we're going to talk about the software project and how it is similar to the process of buying that home. Same thing, we have a cost associated with building the software, and depending on the skills of the developers and the time that the project will take to complete, we definitely want to have quality work that we produce. But the main component of cost to this project is the speed that it takes to deliver from the time that developer gets an idea in front of them to code to actually delivering it as a product to the consumer. So all the new tools that we start using have associated costs to adoption. So and the same thing with NX, right? So when we propose NX to our fellow developers, the way I approached is to concentrate on the speed and efficiency of using NX. And with that, we will just go through all the different key points that you would introduce to your team when you propose to using NX. Obviously, you would have to first fall in love with the idea yourself. So you would have to play with it and learn how to do it, because at the end, when we talk about people telling you no, that will come in handy. So let's just say you have a brand new project, which is best case scenario in every developer's world. And if you get a greenfield project, to start fresh is very easy. You just run this command, and NX creates a brand new application with all of the folders set up for you, and you get first application already ready to go. The second bullet point here is converting your single Angular application to a monorepo, and there's two different ways you can do that. And I'll show you an example with the repository that I have open here really quick when I different branches how I did it. But when you run this command, it actually converts your Angular application to a single app monorepo, where all you're gonna have is one application, and without even thinking about going to multiple applications, you will have that. Although you can always convert it to multiple apps in the scenario of let's just say you have a small project and eventually it grows into a big enterprise. You have a client-facing app, and also you have like an administration tool that you build to automate some of the backend tasks, and you want to add like an admin website. You would convert then single app monorepo to an integrated one, and by running this command, it actually moves your single app application monorepo into a little different structure where you're now able to run multiple applications or create multiple applications within your monorepo. So now we're going to talk about all the benefits of going with monorepo and all the speed that it will add to your software development cycle. One of my favorites is caching. And as soon as you convert your app to NX monorepo, you get an NX folder, and inside that NX folder, you will see some files accumulating, and those are all the caching that NX implemented for us. Because when we have an application with multiple libraries, and let's just say you're changing an app, but you're not actually touching the libraries, and you want to run the unit tests on it, the caching will be used to speed up that process. Same thing with linting and build processes, and that's one of the things that I use every day. And actually, you can run this command with an affected flag, which gives you which gives you that ability to just run the test for the changes that are affected within all of the references of your application. So if you have an application and then you have multiple libraries, depending on where you changes, it will bubble up to run those tests. This comes in handy when you are using cloud caching, which is like a paid version of NX. And there's a couple of different ways of enabling cloud. When you just start out with your monorepo, you do get a limited amount of free cloud caching, so you can kind of play with it. For enterprise level caching, this is something that you would use in your CI/CD pipelines. Then you would have to kind of go through onboarding process of implementing that into your pipelines. You can enable it if it's not enabled during your process by running a generator for it. NX has lots of different generator, which is like a tool, another tool in your toolbox. And these tools could be modified, and you can actually write your own. Just like in Angular, you would write schematics. You can write generators, and also there are some executors that you could run within NX. This is beyond the talk that I'm having today, because I just want to give an overall for people who know nothing about NX, just so you would know what it is, so you can go and explore more. So the second best thing about NX monorepo is having a single package JSON file. So this will streamline your upgrade tasks for new versions, keeping new versions throughout your applications for your projects. So if you have different repositories, what often happens is every repository could be on a different version of Angular. With this, because all of your apps are within one repository, you will be able to have all of your apps aligned with one version. And when you go through the migrate process, which is a command, that NX provides, and then you have some upgrade tasks that you would have to go through. But the process itself, it's very simple, and it's allows you to have all of your teams on the same. In case there are multiple teams, right now we're concentrating on your small project, just because in order to learn, you have to start small. So one other benefit of using NX, which is also one of my favorites, is exploring projects and in our workspace. And the first thing is a dependency graph, is visualizing your application in all your libraries by running this command. You can do this by using a terminal, which will open up a server, and you can do it like a web view, or you can. So this one is actually. So this one is not a web view. This is a web view. So you can actually, when you do a command in terminal, you get this view, and this is actually with by using NX console, an extension for VS Code. And again, this is this presentation is all around VS Code because this is what I use. For IntelliJ, you don't have to talk to the documentation on NX website. Within NX console extension, you can also run your graph visualization, and this is very handy to see all of your references. Make sure you don't have anything that's referencing in the wrong space. And in this example, I have one app and there's no libraries, but in the real life scenario, you would have multiple libraries and you would see how they all connect here, and you can visualize your projects this way. Again, this is the web view. And another one is project detail. So for the project detail, again, with NX console, you can click on the project JSON file, and there's a view for project detail that you see like this, and you can see all the tasks that are available for this project. And the same thing you can do with the web view by running the command, this command right here, NX show project, and then the project name, there's this view, there's this web, and it will open up a web view for you. Okay, so these are all of the positive pros about using NX monorepo. So you get caching, single package JSON, viewing project in your workspace. NX console already mentioned, this is an extension, a very powerful extension that helps you scaffold your code. You can run tasks even from the view of your workspace, and etc. Integrations of new tooling, this is something also you can explore, because NX monorepo is not just built for Angular. Let's just say you have a project where you're working on an Angular application, but you have another developer coming with experience with React experience, for example. You can easily create a React application and put it in the same repository, and there's lots of advantages of doing that as well. There's many other tools that I don't have time to talk about today. One other thing that my colleagues wanted me to mention is domain-driven design is really intuitive within NX monorepo, allows you to create feature-based libraries. There's lots of generators for it, and that's everybody loves doing that. Let's see. So I just kind of walked you through all of the benefits of using NX, but I do want to also bring up the drawbacks, and this is where we're quickly going to talk about taking no for an answer. So because software application is about quality and speed, those are kind of go hand in hand with the cost of the application. Sometimes you will receive from your peers or from your managers that there's no time. This is sounds like a tech debt or whatnot. And the reason you will hear that is valid, and I think it's worth addressing that. Hearing your peers saying that means that it's not that they don't want to do it, it just there is a real problem of having somebody bring a tool that nobody knows how to use. So the way I approached it is I proposed that I would do the task. So when I had my free time of waiting for testers to complete something, I actually took some time and I converted existing Angular application to NX and gave everybody a similar presentation on how to use NX. And so far I have a couple of different happy customers, but understanding that you kind of have to take a lead on converting a regular Angular application to NX, repository to NX monorepo is kind of like the main point of taking a no for an answer. It doesn't mean that they don't want you to do it. It just means that nobody else wants to do it. And you have to kind of be in charge of that and taking the responsibility for growing the project from the monorepo point of view. And another thing that kind of comes from that is you will have to keep up with the updates. And there is a really cool feature that came out, I think, starting with the version 18, where NX doesn't have to be on the same version as Angular anymore. And you can actually have new versions of NX and keeping Angular on the older version if you are not ready to upgrade yet. And yeah, but becoming an expert in a tool like this gives you lots of advantages. And I encourage everybody to go ahead and do that, because this will give you lots of bonuses for your career, and just being more productive is another plus that I already described. And yeah, I think advancing your knowledge is just something that we all do as programmers, and this is just another tool that that I encourage you to take time to learn, and hopefully you'll enjoy it, and you'll be happy, and yeah, and thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed this talk.
Thank you so much, Kate.
Mhm.
We had a lot of people in the chat discussing NX while you were talking.
Oh man, did I get any pluses? Because I wonder.
There were some, but I think most people did not put a plus, so I think it was new for a lot of people.
Oh,
We did have a
good.
Yeah, I think we had a question from Matthew Berry. He asked, how would you quantify how much using NX accelerates you? 10% faster, 20% faster. Is there a way you could put a number on that?
Well, it depends on the size of the project, because caching is the thing that speeds up the build process, or the build process is sped up by the caching. So if you have a very small project, you might see like 3 seconds shade off. But if you are working on a huge project like Chris and I are working on right now, this could be a long time. Also depends on how your project is structured, how your repository is structured, and you're not constantly changing a library that everybody depends on, because then caching will not work for that scenario. But if you're making everything modular, then you can see significant amount of time saved. And the answer is depends, unfortunately.
That's the senior dev answered everything, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
But no, that's great. I know it's something that managers often ask, right? Like, well, if we're going to use it, how much faster is it going to make you? We have another question from Anthony Blasco. How has the debate around monorepos versus multi-repo changed over the past few years?
Philosophical question, it sounds like.
It was a what? Sorry?
It sounds like a philosophical question.
Yeah.
Well, I think monorepo is winning, and this is why this talk came out, because I I am hearing that some people just don't know about it, and I encourage people to know about it just so they can try it. And I think until you try it, you can't really make that debate, you know. You can debate all you want about the subject that you don't know about, but you're not really going to feel the difference unless you try it.
Yep, I completely agree. And I learned about it just maybe a year and a half ago when I was on a project with 5 repos, and they all had to be upgraded from, I think, Angular 11 to 14. And some of them depended on the other ones, and it was a huge mess. And then I learned about NX, and I was like, this could have been so much simpler. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kate. We're
Sure,
going to
thank
move
you.
on to Jason and Marcus.
Yes.
Hey, my partner in crime.
Partner in crime. Good to see you,
Good to
Jason.
see you too, Marcus.
Very excited to introduce you today.
You guys kind of did me dirty, man. You put me up after Kate and Bradley. Come on.
I know. Well, we figured that if there's anyone that can handle it, it's you. Um, so yeah, a quick introduction for those who have not had been fortunate to meet Jason before. Jason lives in Utah with his lovely family. He's a senior staff engineer at Bill, driving large, exciting Angular initiatives. He's a Google developer expert in Angular, and on top of all of that, he also runs Angular streams multiple times a week. I will put the Twitch link in the chat, and you also do stream on YouTube, and you just started streaming on Twitter as well. So you almost check that out if you have not. Yeah, and today you're gonna talk about some state management in Angular. So with that, I'm handing it over to you, Jason. Very excited for this talk. And yeah, the floor is yours.
So before I get started, I just want to say I don't want to get political here. And it's really, really easy to get political, especially with the climate around what's going on in the US right now. And I don't want that to be that. This is intended entirely to be funny. If it's not funny, I failed. If it is, then I succeeded, and maybe I'll try it again. But I decided what would happen if we made some caricatures of programmers and just and had them debate for who would be the potential candidates for the president of state. Right? Who's going to control how state is handled in Angular? And that's kind of setting the ground for where we are. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We have 2 exciting candidates for you today, and we're going to start right away. First candidate, right off the bat, Jason, as a potential candidate for president of state, how do you propose we should handle state in Angular? Well, first of all, I want to make sure to let everybody know that I am the best programmer ever. I know everything there is to know. You need to understand that about me. Next, I realized that Papa Mishko, when he blessed us with Angular, decreed the sacred Angular. We should stick with the sacred Angular. Angular is a full framework. It has everything you need. You should not ever have to bring anything into Angular. We would not change. We should never, ever change the sacred Angular. The sacred Angular should stay how Papa Mishko declared it, and that's how it should be. We should not pollute Angular with libraries. It makes my blood boil. We need to make our Angular nice again. I have t-shirts and hats that we will be sharing. We will double down on Zone.js. In fact, I have a plan to create Zone.js 2. And we will make React pay for us to build Zone.js 2.
Well, okay. I do not believe you answered my question. Jason, I propose the same question to you. As a candidate for president of state, how would you handle state management in Angular?
Well, first of all, I, along with what we saw from Bradley today, would encourage designers to move state out of their components. This is a healthy way to manage state. Why would we do this? Well, if done properly, having state out of components is better for reactivity. Why is that? Well, now your templates react to the services that are providing state. It's better for testability. Again, my good friend Bradley showed us earlier. Testability comes when we separate business logic from display logic. It's better for scalability. When you want to share state, when you want to share services, having smaller pieces of those makes it easier to share. I propose that if I am selected as president of state, we will partner with state management libraries, people who know how to do state management right. For example, RX Angular. They were zoneless before zoneless was cool. NGRX, the OG state management solution. We have component store from them, signal store, and full NGRX if you need it. State Adapt, the forgotten state management solution. NGXS is where everybody escaped to when they moved away from NGRX. And finally, if you're really interested in state machines, XState is a possibility, which is state machines in Angular. And we can thank Jan Niklas, and I'm right over the top of this, but Jan Niklas has a library that will allow us to use XState in our Angular. By doing this, by partnering with people who understand state, we can build services that will give us more power and control and reactivity in our applications.
Amazing. Very interesting. You seem to have thought about this a bit. Jason, do you have a rebuttal?
Well, first of all, I need to remind everybody that I am the best programmer ever. My opponent is an idiot. I can build anything he can build in 2 days, and I can do it with better results. You should never use NGRX. We learned this a long time ago. NGRX is the devil. You should never use it. Angular is a full framework. You can do everything with input and output. You might have to write a service here and there, if you want to get fancy. Anything else makes it impossible for you to upgrade Angular.
Okay, we're lost in the weeds here. Jason, maybe you can bring some sanity back to this debate. Would you like to respond?
Very much so. First of all, my opponent is not wrong. For a lot of use cases, inputs, outputs, and services work very well. They are crucial. And they're a crucial part of Angular. We shouldn't just abandon them for something shiny and new. I don't disagree with my opponent in this. However, there is a cost if we're going to go that route. State now exists in your component and forms. This makes it so that you have to test your component and forms, and not just component tests, but often unit test. This is a kind of a slippery slope because often the way we write unit tests aren't proper component tests, and then the way we write component tests aren't proper unit tests. To get to state, you now have to access components and forms. This leads to prop drilling. Prop drilling is where you start chaining input, input, input down to a child component, and then output, output, output from that child component back up. It's painful, especially when those chains get deep and difficult to maintain. You maintain your state management solution yourself, meaning that how you do prop drilling or how you do your services or how you get data out of your forms and components is your own custom solution. And anybody who wants to learn your project is going to have to learn that. There's nothing wrong with NGRX, not even full-blown NGRX. And when applied in the right places, it's a joy to use and will improve your applications. There is a risk that libraries go dark. I do not deny this. We see this all the time in the JavaScript, in the JavaScript landscape. There's constantly new libraries showing up and constantly old libraries disappearing. We can prevent this by supporting our communities. Or we can at least hope to prevent it. We can provide professional feedback. We don't always have to be nice and be like, oh, I love this, it's wonderful. But when we need to provide feedback that may not be positive, do it in a professional manner, so that the person who spends their free time maintaining things doesn't feel attacked. Help with translations and documentation. We all know that documentation is the worst thing to maintain. That's why we very rarely do it as developers. And it's even harder for translations. If you have the ability to do translations, doing translations for your favorite project will help adoption, which will help longevity. Evangelize, right? Take some time to tell people about what you love and why you love it. Finally, if something really bothers you, roll up your sleeves and go fix it. Jump into the code. We all write Angular. Learn the community and go in and start providing, pull requests and, become a maintainer of the packages that you love. These will all help in the longevity.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I know who I will vote for.
It's me, right? It's me. I'm the best programmer.
Sure. Okay. Jason, last question. If you were in charge of Angular, what would you change?
Again, I need to preface this by saying I am the best programmer ever. I am going to make our Angular nice again. You guys have to realize I am such a good programmer that Sarah and Minko talk to me. They call me all the time. I cannot get them to stop. This is what I tell them. Signals are wrong. They should never have been added. It takes us away from the sacred Angular. We need to go back to the days of fewer changes. Angular is changing too rapidly. Zone.js 2. You select me, I promise. We'll make it happen. And we will make Vue pay for it. I need to remind everybody that my opponent is an idiot. And I graduated top of my class. This is very important for you to understand. I also built the internet. My opponent cannot claim either of those things. This is why I am the best choice.
The whole internet? That's impressive. Jason, same question. What would you change about Angular?
Very little, to be honest. I spent some time actually thinking about this because I wanted to try and provide something, but there's not really something that comes off the top of my head. I'm actually really happy with the direction that Angular is going right now. The Angular Renaissance has been a lot of fun. There are some things that I do suggest that we do as a community. There's some amazing meta frameworks out there. Analog JS, Spartan. Adi is working on one that's built on top of Spartan also. These meta frameworks are extending what we can do with Angular, and they're doing it in incredible ways. And they're extending the way that we think about Angular and the way that Google thinks about Angular. There's been a lot of good to come out of these meta frameworks. We should look really close at single file components. They're actually one of the most interesting things I've ever seen. Single file components make learning Angular for beginners dead simple. And I love them for it. I would love to see more ideas like the single file components. And that's part of analog JS. Just be explored and looked into, right? We don't have to adopt them. But understanding, what single file components give us is really important. And it's been a lot of fun to explore myself. Participate in Angular, participate in your meetups, right? I listed that here, right? Make the community better. Attend the Angular community meetup. These guys work really, really hard and they do it for free. So it's definitely worth your time to come attend a meetup. Most of you, I recognize a lot of faces here. So I know a lot of you guys have been doing this for years. Support your local meetups, go speak there. Maybe help set up or tear down if you don't feel like speaking. You know, just support your local meetups. Support your conferences if you can. Conferences are really struggling right now, and you know, if you could support conferences in any way, it would be a big help. You know, Marcus and I probably organize one of the easier conferences for us to work on. We help Adi with that, and there's still a lot of work that goes into just an online only conference. So definitely make sure, you know, if you have the ability, support your conferences. And then finally, to quote, you know, one of the great movies from my childhood, be excellent to each other and party on, dudes. Right. Just a big thank you to everybody. I had a lot of fun setting this up. I'll take my name off the screen. Hopefully it went over well. If it went over well, then yeah, it was great. If it didn't go over well, then go watch something by Shy on the internet and you guys will do awesome. But thank you very much. I had a lot of fun.